And we're joined now by the Republican Party Chair, Rex Priebus. Mr. Chairman, you have initiated the most public, comprehensive post-election review in your party's history. And my source for that is you. I mean, I understand that's how you characterize it. So tell us, what's the headline here?
Well, I mean, it is true. I mean, you don't see too many political parties or organizations around Washington that put all their cards face up on the table, and that's what we did. This is unprecedented, and it's something that we had to do, and it's something we worked really hard on. Let me just tell you real quickly, generally, what we've found out. Number one, I believe our party's had a real quality of contacts problem, and what I mean is that we have become a party that parachutes into communities 4 months before an election. And while that's how we operated for years and years, and we've done well as compared to ourselves, in comparison to the other side, the Obama campaign lived in these communities for years. The relationships were deep. They were authentic. So first of all, one of the major things you're going to see tomorrow come out is that for the first time in our party's history, we're not talking about having a few people down the hallway working on outreach and inclusion. We're going to be announcing a $10 million initiative just this year, in which it will include hundreds of people paid across the country from coast to coast in Hispanic, African American, Asian communities, talking about our party, talking about our brand, talking about what we believe in, going to community events, going to swearing-in ceremonies, being a part of the community on an ongoing basis, paid for by the Republican National Committee to make the case for our party and our candidates.
So what does that mean? Same message, but just more people out there to talk about it?
Well, for one thing, Bob, if you're not in the community, if you're not talking to people, and the level of familiarity isn't there, then things and silly things like Todd Aiken and some of the goofy things that were said, when there's a vacuum, the caricature becomes true if you're not there. So if you have unscripted moments and you've got no relationship to explain anything, obviously I believe you're a sitting duck. That's just one thing. Obviously, we've got technology issues.
What about the overall message? Do you feel that your message was not as strong as it could have been the last time?
Well, listen, I think we've got to do a better job relating issues to people's lives. I mean, when you're talking about, let's just say, the debt, right? It's not just a matter of mathematics. It's a matter of what happens in your life. Are you going to have the money to send your kids to school? Is our government spending too much money servicing the credit card payment on the debt? Are you going to be able to live the American dream? Is your employer going to be able to give you a raise because the government needs more money to run their company? We have to relate things to people's lives. We have to win the math war, which we do a good job of, but we're going to have to learn how to win the heart war, and that's in presidential elections. What is plaguing our party.
Let me ask you this. I understand that you're also planning some very significant schedule changes. For example, the scheduling of your convention. You want it earlier now, as I understand?
Well, absolutely. I mean, these candidates are not taking public financing anymore, and I don't want to bore our listeners on campaign finance, but here's what I'll tell you. One of the reasons why Mitt Romney was a sitting duck for 2 months over the summer was that under the campaign finance laws, he couldn't use money that he'd already raised until after he received the nomination for president in August. I believe that our primary process was way too long. I think our calendar needs to be looked at. I think our debate calendar needs to be shrunk. I think we had way too many debates with our candidates slicing and dicing each other, and I think they had to wait too long to get to the convention. I'm calling for a convention in June or July, and we're going to set up a commission that's going to make that decision. I'm going to be a part of that. I'm going to chair that commission, but no more August conventions.
And as I understand it then, fewer debates the year before the presidential year. You'll start them. When would you like to start them? They started, in
If it was up
February?
to me, I wouldn't start a debate until, September. I mean, if it was up to me. And I would do one a month. I mean, this is me talking now. I do one a month. I'd have more say over the moderators, more say over the debate partners. I would limit the debate to a reasonable amount. I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, but not 23, Bob.
Okay.
It's ridiculous.
We're going to continue this. This is
bet.
fascinating, and part 2. In the meantime, we'll be back in a moment with some personal thoughts. And welcome back to Face the Nation, page 2. We're back with the chairman of the Republican Party, Rex Priebus. Mr. Priebus, I'm fascinated by this study. I mean, you want to move up the conventions now. You're talking about a huge outreach program to minorities. But the scope of this study that you did, I find interesting as well. You tell me that you talked basically to 50,000 people, either by phone or in polling, or in person, or in focus groups.
That's right.
What did the focus groups? What did they tell you about what people think about the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, they told us what you would think that they would think. I mean, that number one, we're a little bit too math focused and not focused in people's hearts, so that we don't relate to, I think, average Americans more than we should. Stuffy old guys, too much. And it really is painful to hear, because reality is we got a very young party. I mean, you just had Paul Ryan on. He's 42. Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, Chris Christie, Nikki Haley. I mean, it's a young party. But it just kind of shows you we've done a really lousy job of branding and marketing who we are. And so one of the things that we've brought out of this is not just branding and marketing around election time, but year round. When's the last time, you used to see these years ago, I'm a Republican because. We're talking about a national marketing and branding campaign as well about our party, what we believe in. Everything from college campuses to just civic opportunities, to even going to black colleges, historically black colleges and universities, telling the story and history of our party, the history of equality, the history of liberty and freedom, and doing that through the national party on a consistent basis. This is not a short-term view, Bob. I know that everything isn't going to change in a year. But if we don't start now, we're not going to have any more success in 4 years, 8 years, or 12 years. We have a long-term view, and we're going to stop being a supporting actor and start leading this country.
Let me ask you a little bit about what you want to do about the primary system that we have now. I mean, what do you say? Too many debates. The debates start much too early. You want fewer debates, and you want to exercise as a party more control over them. But what can you really do about the party primaries, because the states control them?
Well, we can do quite a bit. I mean, obviously.
What do you want to do?
Well, what I would personally want to do is I would set a beginning date, maybe January 1st, and then I would set a new end date for the primary season, maybe the end of April, no later than mid-May, and then if you have your convention at the end of June or mid-July, you compress the primary process. Just doing that, Bob, you know, is pretty unprecedented. If you can get an April 30th or a mid-May end date, you've just shortened the primary season. You've also compacted it a little bit as well. But under the rulemaking process of the Republican National Committee, that's one thing and one power we do have, which is we can control the method by which delegates are awarded and how they're divvied up by states and state legislatures. So, of course, we're going to need states to cooperate. This is not going to be done without state parties being on board. But there are lots of options out there. One is, after your carve-out states are done, one option was to divide the country in quarters and do a regional rotating primary, where you do a different region every 2 to 3 weeks. That can be complicated, but that's one of the options that's out there. If by just setting an end date to the primary, and just by moving the convention up, just by moving the convention, Bob, you're automatically shortening the primary process itself.
I take it you think that the debates hurt your party rather than help people get to know who these people were.
Well, it hurt them because, number one, when we walked in the door, of course, there was about 6 or 7, or there were multiple already on the calendar. It hurt because there was no way to control it. I mean, if you have 10 candidates and 9 out of 10 raise their hand and say, I'm going to take any 2-hour block offered, well, then you have a debate every 3 days, and you're the only show in town. So while we were playing footsie, debating each other 23 times, what was the other side doing? They were spending potentially hundreds of millions of dollars on data, technology, voter outreach. They're actually getting the job done. We were debating and bailing the Republican National Committee out of debt. I mean, that tells you a lot of the story. So if it gets to technology and all of the work that we need to do there, and opening our technology efforts up to an open source, setting up an office in the Silicon Valley, doing hackathons across the country, this is going to be huge, Bob, and we're ready to go, and we're ready to lead.
All right, well, we'll be watching, we'll be listening when you outline all of the details tomorrow in a speech, I think, at the National Press Club.
You bet. Thanks,
Chairman,
Bob.
thanks so much.
God bless.
We'll be back in just a minute.